Now let's talk about, this is our last program, by the way. This is top 3 issues facing hotels today: secure key control, fentanyl, and carbon monoxide poisoning. Let's jump into our panel. Joining us today, Mr. Brad Bonnell, principal of the Hotel Security Group in Alpharetta, Georgia. Brad has a law enforcement background, a remarkable military and law enforcement background, but he's also worked in lodging security for, I don't know how many years, but it's been a whole bunch, for the top brands in the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, we are always fortunate to have Brad join us today. Please welcome Brad. Joining Brad is going to be Mr. Sal Caccavale, Principal, Global Hospitality Security Solutions out of Phoenix, Arizona. But Sal has over 35 years of work in the hospitality, of working directly in the hospitality industry, consulting in the hospitality industry, as well as focusing on litigation support. And most of his career is spent with Hilton, but he brings a wealth of information around security and safety aspects of the lodging industry. Please welcome Sal. And then my name is Stephen Barth, founder of HospitalityLawyer.com. Let's get to it. Marilyn, on our first subject, secure key control. Brad, tell us what the big challenges are today and why we need to talk about key control systems, especially master key controls.
Thank you, Stephen, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to do everything I can to make this time well spent. Maintaining the integrity of a hotel electronic card key system is a lot like holding a wolf by the ears. If you let go for just a second, the consequences can be catastrophic. Electronic card key accountability system control is critical in providing guests with a reasonable level of care against the reasonably anticipated and predictable threats associated with the unauthorized use of a master card key or a room key. Now, to ensure that our guests are protected from the unauthorized use of a MasterCard key or an inappropriately issued room card key, it's imperative that hotel management ensures access to the MasterCard keys is limited, restricted, and controlled, that all MasterCard keys are accounted for and inventoried daily. The MasterCard keys are never to be taken off property. The MasterCard key logs are retained and archived as potentially discoverable documents. The authorization to make MasterCard keys must be limited to only management personnel. Associate access to the card key encoder is gained by use of a discrete password. The use of common or shared passwords must be prohibited. That the encoder has been purged of the passcodes of any prior associates who had access to the card key system. That the hotel is immediately rekeyed following the loss of any MasterCard key. This next one's very critical. That front desk personnel have been provided with clear instruction as to what criteria must be met before an additional card key can be issued. That the electronic card key programming device is to be secured with limited access. And that the secondary guest room lock disengagement tool, sometimes referred to as a lock jockey, is readily available in response to a situation in which an unconscious guest in distress has engaged the secondary lock. Now, due to employee turnover, the high employee turnover rate in the hospitality industry, it's important that management team members are trained and retrained concerning, one, the functionality and the role of the hotel E-key or emergency key, the key that you make available to first responders, the use of a blocking key, how to rekey the hotel, how to interrogate the electronic room key, and what to do to manage the encoder in the event of extended power loss. These things are pedestrian. They are often overlooked, forgotten about as time goes by. And as a result, hotels often find themselves struggling in premise security liability lawsuits when they are asked to demonstrate that they have maintained the integrity of their electronic key control system. I'm satisfied that at any given time, there are cases in court against hotels accused of negligence because they did not exercise some of the things that I've mentioned here. We have become seduced by the technology. and we tend to overlook the more mundane tasks that you're required to execute in order to maintain the integrity of your system, such as having a daily MasterCard key log. Again, I should have said this is the least cerebral part of this presentation. This is more of the sex and violence, Jerry Springer section. So I'm going to do this rather quickly. But again, what I have found throughout the hospitality industry is that we become complacent in terms of maintaining the integrity of the electronic card key system. And these are some of the issues, some of the points that I've named where we are particularly vulnerable.
And Brett, I want to emphasize before I get Sal's thoughts, I want to emphasize one of your points, which was securing the encoder itself. Because if we don't secure the encoder, most of our other policies are going to lack teeth. Is that a fair way to put that?
That is a fair way to put it.
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize that point that he made, ladies and gentlemen. Sal, what has been your experience with key control systems? To Brad's point, I know when you were involved, I know you know the history of key controls very, very well, but I want to ask you, is it your perspective today, like Brad's, that we have come complacent in the industry?
I don't think we have become complacent. I think we've been complacent, Stephen. You know, as I go out and view and inspect hotels and do risk assessments, I often find that hotels lack proper key controls. We have, in some cases, general managers, directors of sales, directors of engineering, taking their master keys home with them. They keep them and carry them on their person all the time, as well as their emergency keys that can override a deadbolt. You know, as Brad mentioned, keys should never leave the property, particularly an emergency key, an E-key. Those should be under lock and key at all times. There are so many antiquated methodologies that are still in existence. Paper and pen to sign out for keys that are kept in department leads, desk drawers, versus putting them in a lockbox. But even better yet, I'm an advocate of the electronic key dispensers, Morris Watchman, Key Tracker, things of that nature. One cabinet, metal cabinet, can hold about 100 keys. I think the pricing is around $10,000. But they automatically dispense a key that is assigned to that particular person. And there are procedures and circuit breakers involved that when that particular employee does not return the key at the specified time, it sends an alert to a predetermined hierarchy so that you can go out and try and determine where that key is at that exact moment. But relative to rekeying, absolutely. You know, I recall one of the attorneys that I've worked with in my past life who always said it's defined as a reasonable amount of time for when we rekey. Well, what's a reasonable amount of time was my response, and he said that's up to a jury to decide.
Very interesting. Okay, and yeah, as I mentioned, Sal works with a lot of lawyers in litigation support role, and I was remiss in not mentioning that about Brad Bonnell as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to let you know that we have created a video on key control aspects in hotels that you can access via our blog. I think you'll find it very helpful for training purposes with your entire team, not just your executive team. So let's go to this next topic, Marilyn. And Sal, talk to us about carbon monoxide poisoning. We get the headlines, but is this a big issue for us?
Yeah, it certainly is. And you just have to open up the newspaper or go on the web if that's what you do to read, keep current on your current events. But you would seem to think that this is a pretty straightforward type of discussion, but it's actually very complex. The National Fire Protection Association, the International Fire Code, all have standards, particularly with the IFC and their 2012 version of their standard for those cities that adopted that particular version in 2012 for the IFC, they called for carbon monoxide detectors and alarms in all hotel guest rooms in the United States. There is a US-based lobbying firm or entity that was successful in getting that repealed due to cost. And maybe that IFC standard from 2012 was a little robust, but IFC in later 2015 came out and said, well, if we're not going to put carbon monoxide detectors and alarms in each guest room, at least let's put it where there's fossil fuel. And if you have a fireplace in a guest room, if you have your kitchen or boiler or water tanks being duct or flued out through the side of the building, then we should put carbon monoxide detectors and alarms in those guest rooms also. There are, and currently there are 6 states that still don't have any requirements for CO detectors and alarms, which is kind of a head scratcher as to why they are so far behind. But again, you look in the newspaper and you see Sandals Resorts, I think it was last year, early summer of last year, 3 folks were overcome by carbon monoxide. And Sandals' response was, well, we're going to put carbon monoxide detectors and alarms in every guest room, which is not necessary. And again, that's pretty robust. That's overkill, in my opinion, because now they have a new standard that they have to follow relative to maintaining and swapping out those devices as they grow older. Again, you really only need them where there is fossil fuel or where there is a potential for fossil fuel. There was an Airbnb in November of 22 in Mexico City where the folks were overcome by carbon monoxide. So I don't know if Airbnb has carbon monoxide standards, but I can tell you that most of the major hotel brands do to some degree as to how we regulate it and how we monitor it. But when you put a price tag on it, Stephen, in the past 20 years, there's been well over 1,000 incidents of injuries in US hotels where folks were injured. And out of those injuries, over 40 succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning. So there are ways to prevent it. It's just a matter of making sure that it's not overkill to the hotel industry and that we're not burdening them with unnecessary costs. But I do think as an industry, we need to come up with these with support from NFPA, IFC, the AHLA, and we need to come up with some sort of standards that we can all address and all comply with.
Yeah, I think that's a very good call to action there, Sal. Thanks for that. Those remarks about what it is and how pervasive may not be the right word, but it is happening more frequently. At least we are finding out about it more frequently. It is challenging, though, for the customer because it's odorless, right? You don't know it's there. You just get really violently ill and you're not sure why. I travel with a portable CO monitor, and I encourage everybody to do that. And Sal, to your point about Airbnb, I do think you can add that to one of your criteria when you filter, and they'll pop up, does it have CO monitoring or not? Now, you need to validate that when you get to your destination. But the hotel situation, I'm mindful of one situation, Sal, where the pool heating system was leaking, it wasn't vented properly, and the fumes were seeping into nearby guest rooms, right? So in that situation, where do we put the monitors? We put the monitors, of course, obviously you need professional installation, you need professional maintenance. That would prevent it in the first place. But do you put the monitors next to the fossil fuel burning equipment? Is that the best approach?
Well, you certainly place it in a room, Stephen. You wouldn't want to certainly place it if you had, in this particular case, let's say you have a fireplace in a guest room. You don't want the detector to be directly over the fireplace. if it's a fuel fired. Relative to a pool heater, yeah, I've worked with a case, and we may be referring to the same case, where the person was survived, but was overcome with carbon monoxide poisoning. That particular case was just a perfect storm. But what we did find out later on, and I'm going off a scratchy memory here, but either the hotel installed the heater without permission and did it on their own, and it was improperly installed, or the person who installed it wasn't credentialed, they didn't get a permit from the city, something like that. But I know that the state attorney general went after the hotel and ownership, not just criminally, but civilly.
Yeah, I recall that. I think we are referencing the same case. Well, in the interest of time, Sal, thanks for those thoughts on carbon monoxide. Very helpful and insightful. I want to go on to our last topic, and that's going to be the fentanyl challenges. And if you're not familiar with the challenges that are going on today with fentanyl, you need to get that way. We are seeing more and more overdoses in our hotel spaces, and that's tragic enough because of the impact it has on the individuals and/or death. But we also have to keep in mind, when a situation like that occurs at our hotels, the impact it can have on other guests or the emotional impact on our employees when a death occurs. Those are all things we need to keep in mind. But also, there's a financial aspect to this, which is the remediation side of the guest room when fentanyl or other type of illicit drugs have been produced, manufactured, and/or used in the space. Brad, will you give us your thoughts on the fentanyl challenges that the lodging space is facing today?
You made a number of good points. Thank you, Steve. Clearly, the frequency with which fentanyl incidents are occurring in hotels has established the threat of exposure to fentanyl to be a reasonably anticipated and predictable risk to guest and staff safety, which requires hotels to take appropriate and reasonable mitigation. Now, you can mitigate the risk of fentanyl by, one, raising staff awareness through training to recognize the indicators of drug trafficking and manufacturing, establishing an illicit drug protocol through a policy statement and standard operating procedures that provides information concerning hazard identification. What are the indicators that a toxic substance might be present? How to respond to suspected contamination. Specifically, secure the room or site and remove the room from the inventory as an out-of-service room. Notify the authorities. Report the contamination to risk management and your life safety team. You then need to conduct a contamination assessment, then remediation. And Steve, as you said, the cost of remediating a room that has been contaminated by fentanyl, the cost going up exponentially. A couple months ago, the cost ranged between $30,000 and $50,000 per room. I'm dealing with an incident right now where the total cost to remediate one room is going to be in excess of $65,000. You return a room to service only with the authority of the local board of health or other agency having jurisdiction over public health. Strongly recommend that you ensure compliance with OSHA requirements concerning blood-borne pathogens. What we are seeing is that OSHA is on the warpath, particularly on the West Coast. They're coming in and auditing hotels. The OSHA requirements concerning blood-borne pathogens somewhat overlaps the issue of fentanyl contamination. We are also having to deal with the Narcan dilemma. Historically, hotels have taken the position that we do not practice medicine and avoid providing or administering any non-emergency medical assistance. However, we've had some hotels who've recently been provided with Narcan kits by first responders. And the hotels call us and say, what do we do with it? So again, a bit of a moral dilemma that we are in. I also advocate an intelligence-led security strategy, that the threat of fentanyl can be mitigated by recruiting hotel personnel to report any suspicious activity or observation to management, with the knowledge that they can do so confident that their identity will not be revealed to protect them from retaliation, revenge, ridicule, or humiliation. We have many people working in our hotels who come from different societies, different cultures. They don't understand what confidentiality means. They don't know that they could be protected as a whistleblower. And they are not, as a result, they're not inclined to report suspicious activity because we failed to reach out to them and said, if you want to report something confidentially, you can do so. I will admit that about 150 years ago, I was a criminal investigator at a time before there was such a thing as DNA, CSI, computers, cell phones, body cameras, but we still got the job done through the collection of human intelligence. We had to have people come and tell us where we could find the evidence, where we could find the contraband, who committed the crime. And it's critical that you recruit your housekeepers, your line level staff, and assure them that if they say anything suspicious, that they can report it confidentially without fear of criticism or ridicule. Again, it is, and I think Sal will agree, this is an immediate threat. We're still trying to get our arms around it. I fear things are only going to get worse.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're hearing more and more about these types of circumstances. I want to jump back to one thing that you mentioned, and that's Narcan. You know, Narcan is kind of the anti-fentanyl drug that is administered via nasal spray. Brad, do I have that right? So it's a
That's
relatively correct. Simple process. But Brad's point is very well taken that first responders are going to hotels and saying, hey, we want you to keep this on and this is how you administer it. We don't have our arms wrapped around that yet and what our policy should be there. We're kind of torn a little bit. We want to have great relationships with first responders and we want to do what's best with our customers and our employees. It reminds me of the challenges we had with AED systems when they first came on the scene, but it's something to consider. But Brad, I'd like to go to these next slides where you've created some posters that I want everybody to see about how we can use these for training. So red flags for manufacturing, Class B, red flags for drug use, Class C, behavioral. Did you guys put these together? These are terrific.
They were prepared by, in collaboration with a company called Facts, and these are drafts. The final version will come out. We're probably going to eliminate the Class A, B, and C designation, and we are also going to include the instruction in Spanish. And I will tell you, that it is such a problem that we are expediting the production and the distribution of these to over 650 hotels.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Sal, I think when we were talking before, you were trying to develop things like this back in the day for other challenges. Of course, fentanyl wasn't in existence then, but can you comment a little bit about that?
Yeah, Stephen, you're right. We, Brad and his assistant Sherry and I were talking at your conference earlier this year that there used to be a very similar poster in the early 80s that was distributed to hotels, and it was really more for methamphetamines, drug labs in hotels, not necessarily related to fentanyl. And that was a fantastic poster. And we've been looking to see if we could somehow find that poster and resurface it and reutilize it. But kudos to Brad and Sherry for putting this together. This is fantastic, and it's sad that we have to see this back out there, but it's a necessity. And just to follow up on a comment that you made, Stephen, Honolulu, Hawaii, City Council approved an ordinance that effective January 1st, certain businesses will have to carry some vials of Narcan on their premises. But the ordinance does not stipulate that management has to administer it. It says they have to carry it, they have to be trained in the use of it, but it doesn't say they don't have to administer it. And as you know, we've had this conversation before with you and with others. We need to be really cautious about how we use and respond to drug-related, particularly fentanyl-related type of medical emergencies. What we don't want to see is that responder becoming the second victim.
Right.
We have to be very cautious. And if you look at the Environmental Protection Agency, they came out with a 63 page guide or recommendation on how to clean up drug labs, particularly methamphetamines and fentanyl. But again, it's only recommendations, but it's certainly detailed. And if you're looking for something to put you to sleep, read that.
Well, we're going to wrap up with that because you're right. It's challenging if we ask somebody on our team to administer Narcan because they could get contaminated by the residue. Is that fair?
That's very fair. Yes.
Yeah. So we've got to think about PPE. We've got, before we get to the point of administration. So lots to think about in this space. I'd like to remind the audience, we also created a video with Sal and Brad's help, specifically on fentanyl. It's about a 35-minute program that you can use to inform yourself, your executive team, and of course your employees about fentanyl and remediation of your hotel rooms. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Informative as always. We appreciate everybody's time and attention. You can reach us on all of our social outlets. And
Stephen, before we log
yes.
off, I'm so sorry. We do have one question in the chat. I didn't know if you want to address that.
I do. Thank you. Let's get it. How did I miss that? Let's see. Just one second. Any duty in states, municipalities, or civic statutes with Narcan that would impose such a duty for hotel security or employees to administer Narcan. Guys, I'm not familiar with a state law that says they must administer it. Are either of you?
I am not.
Not relative to administration, but again, Honolulu, effective January 1st, says you have to have it in certain businesses. I do know that San Francisco is another city that is looking towards some sort of ordinance relative to Narcan, but what that looks like and the scope of it, we don't know yet.
Right, and then the second part of the question is, do we think that as part of reasonable care, we should be make Narcan available and training our employees to administer it? We've talked about this before, right? That's why I brought up the AED similarity. My personal opinion is we're not quite there yet, but I'd like to get y'all's thoughts about that. Sal, take it away.
Well, I'm going to let Brad go first on this one.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will say that if you are in a situation that requires administration of Narcan, you're going to have to be trained because there are certain risks associated with administering Narcan where someone could have a reaction to Narcan that creates a whole nother problem. I have to agree with you, Steve. I think it's early on in the evolution. It's very similar to the automated defibrillators. It is a dilemma. Again, I would never, I'm at this point would not be comfortable telling one of the hotel managers that it is expected of you to make physical contact with someone who is experiencing a fentanyl overdose and to administer this medication. I'm just not, there are just too many problems associated with that I wouldn't be comfortable with taking that position that this is going to be a policy statement. But I don't know what the right thing to do is. We had a general manager who made contact with fentanyl contaminated surface. She immediately went into an overdose state. The paramedics that responded quickly had Narcan and revived her. So, I know that it will work, but I also know that there are certain individuals that if you administer Narcan, there are side effects. So there are risks to this that I don't fully understand. And right now I feel like erring on the side of caution that I'm not going to tell my people, okay, I want you to take the position that you have a duty to become trained and familiar and to administer this. It's just too many unknowns. I have too much to learn about it. So probably not the answer you wanted, but it's the best I can give.
Recommendation would be to talk to in-house counsel also to decide or determine what the reasonable exposure might be for that particular restaurant or hotel. But again, I default back to don't become a second victim. by
Yeah.
responding and getting involved in a situation where we're not medically professionally trained. We're hoteliers first, is what I like to say. We just happen to be security experts.
And that's the difference between the AED analogy, right? That we've got the AED, there's not a lot of danger for the responder, I don't think, or I'm not aware of. But on the fentanyl side and the Narcan side, there's extraordinary danger to the responder, as we've discussed. So we're going to have to wrap it up. Thanks very much for terrific questions. Sal, Brad, thank you as always. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And we'd like to give a big thank you to our speakers and sponsors, Anderson Kill, Ethics Suite, Hotel Security Group, and Global Hospitality Security Solutions. Thank you kindly. We'll look forward to seeing you in November for our next program. Bye for now.